have found has been really beneficial in actually seeing results. My name's Hannah. I'm a PCOS dietitian and I have PCOS myself. Let's dive into today's video. Let's talk about why losing weight with PCOS can feel like such an uphill battle. This is actually because PCOS is an endocrine disorder. So that just means that there's some sort of hormone imbalance, and this hormone imbalance can cause a collection of symptoms. And one of them is difficulty losing weight and it being really easy to gain weight. We see two specific hormones that can really make it difficult to lose weight with PCOS. And these are hormones we often see elevated in women with PCOS. Until we correct that hormone imbalance, it's going to feel nearly impossible to lose weight with PCOS, even if you are in that caloric deficit that we need and doing all the right things. So let's dive into what those two hormones are. And now this first hormone is probably the most common reason I see with my clients for this difficulty losing weight with PCOS. And that hormone is insulin. So insulin is actually a very important hormone to help with your metabolism. Its main job is to act as a key to unlock your cells for glucose to be able to come in to be used as energy. Glucose is the preferred source of energy for your cells. And so anytime there's a lot of glucose floating around your bloodstream, that's going to signal your pancreas to release that insulin to allow your cells to be unlocked for that glucose to be able to come in. The issue though is that when we have too much or too little insulin, and usually in women with PCOS, what we see are these elevated high insulin levels. And there's a couple reasons why this is a concern. One is because insulin is considered a growth hormone. Anytime there's elevated insulin levels in your bloodstream, this is going to signal to your body to be in fat storage mode rather than fat burning mode. Another way elevated insulin levels can impact your weight is that insulin is also an appetite stimulant. So anytime that you have consistently elevated insulin levels, this is going to cause you to have a lot of cravings, specifically for carbs or for sugar, and also going to cause you to have higher hunger levels. So a lot of times what I see with my clients is they just feel insatiable, like they may have had a really big meal, but they still never really feel like they're full no matter how much they eat. And this is often because of that hormone insulin that's signaling to your body to continue to have that increased appetite. And so, like I said, the big issue is not having insulin in your bloodstream. It's very beneficial and crucial for your health, but it's when you're having consistently elevated levels of insulin. And this is what we commonly see in women with PCOS. And this is often known as insulin resistance. And it's estimated that anywhere between 70 and 85% of women with PCOS have this insulin resistance. And so this just means that your cells are resistant to responding to the insulin. So even though the insulin's there saying, hey, go ahead and open up, there's glucose here for the taking, the cells are going to be resistant to responding to it. And so then what your body does because of that, because there's still all this glucose floating around your bloodstream, is your pancreas then releases even more insulin. And so this is where we commonly see those high levels of insulin because there's that insulin resistance. So it's kind of a lot like me as a millennial, and anytime I get a phone call from a number that I don't recognize, I'm not going to answer it. But now if they call back, they're really persistent and calling back, then I know, okay, it must be important. I guess I should answer. So it's kind of that same type of thing in a really simplified version. So your cells aren't responding to that initial insulin, but because your body is creating even more insulin, that's getting your cells to respond. Having those high insulin levels is what can make it really difficult to lose weight. The other kicker with this is that, like I said, those high insulin levels can make it really easy to gain weight. And then the more weight that we gain, our body can become more insulin resistant. So the more fat cells that we have, the more insulin resistance our body becomes and our cells become. And so this can really become a vicious cycle in women with PCOS, where you have those elevated insulin levels. This causes weight gain. This weight gain causes even more insulin resistance, which causes even higher insulin levels. And then the cycle just continues. But the good news is that we can break this cycle. All we have to do is just lower those insulin levels, which we can do through diet, lifestyle, supplements, and medications as well, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But now you might be thinking, so this kind of sounds like me, but how do I know for sure if elevated insulin levels are my true issue? Well, there are some things we can do to really decipher if insulin resistance or elevated insulin is one of your issues. And so one thing could be having those signs and symptoms of high insulin levels, that insatiable hunger, those cravings for carbohydrates and sweets. Also having a lot of fat accumulation around your midsection. That excess belly fat can also be a sign of insulin resistance as well. And so those are some symptoms we can look for, but really the best way to know for sure is through having certain labs done. A couple labs that I usually look at with my clients to see if maybe insulin resistance is one of their underlying issues. The first one is a fasting insulin level. This is probably the number one lab I'm looking for to see if elevated insulin levels might be one of your culprits. So with this lab, you want a fasting insulin under 10. So if you have a fasting insulin over 10, this means you likely have some degree of insulin resistance. Now, there's a couple other labs that we can look at as well if we don't have the fasting insulin. One of them is a hemoglobin A1C. This is a 3-month average of your blood sugar levels. Like we kind of talked about, usually elevated blood sugar correlates with elevated insulin levels. So we can look at a hemoglobin A1C and see if there might be some underlying insulin resistance. But the reason why this isn't the number one lab I want to look for is because sometimes you might have a normal hemoglobin A1C, but you might still have a degree of insulin resistance that we're not catching because we don't have that fasting insulin. But regardless, it can still be really beneficial and helpful to look at to determine if you have some type of insulin resistance going on. Normally, we're looking for a hemoglobin A1C of less than 5.7. And then the third lab that we can look at is a fasting glucose level. So once again, looking at your blood sugar levels, but a fasting glucose is just a one-time snapshot of what your glucose levels or blood sugar levels are. So your blood sugar will fluctuate up and down all day. You could have a false elevated fasting glucose, and maybe the next day it would be normal. So it's not the most accurate picture. That hemoglobin A1C, that 3-month average of your blood sugars, will be a much accurate picture of what your blood sugar levels are trending throughout the entire day over the course of 3 months, but it can still be beneficial. And then we're also looking for a fasting glucose of less than 99. So if any of these numbers are elevated, the fasting insulin, the hemoglobin A1C, or the fasting glucose, it could be an indication of that underlying insulin resistance. These labs aren't required to really rule out if insulin resistance might be a contributing factor for you. So there's a lot of clients that I have that you don't have that lab work available, and we can still go off of some of those symptoms. But like I said, the majority of women that I see, the majority of women with PCOS, do have a degree of insulin resistance. And so being sure to balance your insulin levels is really important to helping with managing all your symptoms, but especially to help with weight loss. And like I said, we'll get into some practical things in just a little bit of how you can do that. The second hormone that I commonly see that can make this weight loss with PCOS more difficult, and that hormone is cortisol. Cortisol is considered that fight or flight stress hormone, and the issue is having too much or too little of this cortisol. And what we see in women with PCOS is that many of them have elevated cortisol levels. And cortisol as well is a hormone that fluctuates throughout the day. Typically, what we see is that cortisol is highest in the morning because cortisol is really helpful in just keeping you alert, helping you to wake up in the morning. So that's why usually first thing in the morning, your body releases a lot of cortisol to help you to get out of bed and help you to start your day. And then at night, we'll see your cortisol really drop. And this is to help your body get ready for, winding down, to get ready for bed. And so that's a typical rhythm of what we see with cortisol. But in women with PCOS, what we'll often find is elevated cortisol throughout the day, and or even sometimes low in the morning and high in the evening, so the opposite of what you want. And this elevated cortisol can make it more difficult to lose weight for a couple of reasons. One, like I said, this is known as the stress hormone. So if you have constantly elevated cortisol levels, your body is always going to be in this state of stress. And whenever your body is in a state of stress, it's not going to operate the way that it should be operating. And one of the things that it's resistant to in that period of stress is weight loss. And this can also contribute to poor sleep patterns, especially if your cortisol levels are really elevated in the evening. It can make it difficult to fall asleep and stay asleep, which that can also just wreak havoc on your hormones and everything as well. And then the final reason this can really impact your weight is that the elevated cortisol levels can also stimulate your appetite as well, which can just lead us to eat more than our body actually needs. How do you know for sure if elevated cortisol levels are one of your underlying issues? Well, once again, the best way to know for sure is by getting your cortisol levels tested. And the best ones are usually the ones that check it throughout the day. So sometimes doctors might just do a one-time cortisol check, but really you want to make sure that you're checking your cortisol throughout the day. So like a 4-point test where it checks your cortisol 4 times throughout the day can really help us to know if it's, high throughout the day when it shouldn't be, or low in the morning when it should be high. It gives us a much better picture. So you can do some home tests as well if you just want to check your levels and see. There's a really good one by Everlywell that I like. It's actually a full female hormone at-home test that checks a lot of different hormones, including your cortisol. So I'll leave that in a link in the description below. But once again, not everyone has these labs available or access to these labs. With my clients, if they don't have their cortisol levels, that's not a make it or break it thing. I usually will do some type of stress assessment and kind of see where their stress levels are at. And honestly, in today's day and age, most people can benefit from some sort of stress management techniques. So once again, even if we don't have concrete labs to say for sure that elevated cortisol levels are one of your underlying issues, usually we can still incorporate some more stress management techniques. And it's not just, mental health type of things. There's a lot of things that can impact your body's stress levels. We can still incorporate those things, and it's going to benefit your overall health anyway. And I just want to note as well, so if you're having difficulty losing weight with PCOS, it could be one of these hormones that are imbalanced. It could also be both of them as well. And so go ahead and leave a comment down below. Which hormone do you feel like is imbalanced for you? Maybe you've had the labs checked, or maybe you just have some of the signs that we've talked about, or maybe it's both. It's very common for me to see that people are struggling with both of these are imbalanced. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about some realistic strategies to help you with balancing both of these hormones to help you finally see success to have weight loss with PCOS. So let's start with the insulin resistance and how you can balance your insulin levels, because this is, like I said, probably the most common one I see. And so as you probably guessed, diet can play a huge role in balancing your insulin levels, because it really starts with balanced blood sugar levels. Because if you have high blood sugar levels, this is going to cause high insulin levels. And so this includes having balanced meals, having enough fiber and protein in your meals. Both of these really just help to keep you full and satisfied. Both of these are digested a lot slower in your digestive system, which means instead of a huge rush of glucose into your bloodstream, it's much more moderate and slow so that your insulin levels don't, spike sky high. So it's like I tell my clients, fiber and protein are going to become your best friends to help with this. And then a lot of my clients are just amazed at how much better their energy levels are, how much less cravings they have when they focus on fiber and protein. And a lot of them are just so amazed at how much easier weight loss is when you're focusing on fiber and protein versus just counting calories alone. And if you want some more ideas of how to really get some good balanced meals with fiber and protein in your diet, I have a free 7-day PCOS meal plan that you can check out for some great ideas for breakfast, lunches, and dinners. And now the next thing that can really help with balancing your insulin levels, of course, physical activity is really beneficial for your overall health in general, and it can really help with balancing your blood sugar and your insulin levels. But if you can also incorporate some strength training or resistance training into that as well, this is incredibly beneficial to help with insulin levels. And one of the reasons is because of how much it can really help with balancing those blood sugar levels. So like I said, that glucose is going to be your cell's main source of energy and fuel. It's also used by your muscle, and in fact can be stored in your muscles. Even just doing this or lifting up groceries, lifting up, your kiddos, your muscles are going to be tapping into the stored glucose that it has in order to be able to do those movements. So the more muscle mass you have, the more storage capacity your muscles have. And the quicker that you can get that glucose out of your bloodstream, the better it's going to be for your insulin levels as well. And so resistance training, building up your muscle mass can be really beneficial in balancing your insulin levels. And this can also be helpful for weight loss because muscles will burn a lot more calories than fat mass will. And so this just really helps to boost your metabolism. So if you can, doing a couple days of resistance training can be really beneficial. And then the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to helping with balancing insulin levels are supplements and medications. And so sometimes these can be really beneficial in just assisting you and taking some of that workload off of you. One of the medications we commonly see for this is metformin. This is one of the reasons why metformin is so commonly prescribed when women are diagnosed with PCOS, because it can help with that blood sugar balance.